English Daily, the podcast.
Your English journey starts now. Hey, English learners. Welcome back to your podcast, the English Daily Podcast.
Yes, we're so happy to have you here today. It's wonderful to see you again, and I truly hope you're ready for an amazing episode, because we've got something really special prepared for you.
English learners, today's episode is all about fluency review, specifically how to track your linguistic compound interest and stay motivated throughout your entire English learning journey.
That's right, Anna. And I think this is one of the most important topics we could possibly discuss, because so many learners give up right when they're about to make a breakthrough. They're just not tracking their progress effectively, and they don't realize how much they're actually growing.
So whether you're a beginner who's just starting out or someone who's been learning for years and feels stuck, you'll absolutely find something valuable in today's conversation. We're going to share personal stories, practical strategies, and really actionable tips that you can start using immediately.
Absolutely. And Anna, I know you've been working on this topic for a while now, so I'm really excited to dive deep into it with you today.
Oh, Jack, you're too sweet. But yes, I've been thinking a lot about this lately because I've seen so many friends and students struggle with consistency. They learn for a week, then take a break, then feel guilty, then give up entirely. It's such a common pattern, and we want to help you break that cycle.
Exactly. And the key insight we're going to explore today is this concept of linguistic compound interest, the idea that small, consistent efforts accumulate over time, just like money in a bank account. But here's the thing, you can't see the interest until you track it properly.
That's such a powerful metaphor, Jack. And I love how it reframes the learning process. Instead of thinking, I need to become fluent by next month, you start thinking, I'm investing a little bit every day and the returns will compound over time.
Right. And that's so much more sustainable and encouraging. So let's dive right in, shall we?
Let's do it. But first, I want to hear from you, Jack. When did you first realize the importance of tracking your language learning progress?
Aw, that's such a great question, Anna. You know, I remember this specific moment very clearly. It was about 3 years ago when I was trying to learn Spanish. I had been studying for almost 6 months, but I didn't feel like I'd improved at all. I was genuinely frustrated and considered giving up.
Oh no, Jack. 6 months is such a significant investment of time and energy. What happened that made you feel like you hadn't improved?
The thing is, Anna, I wasn't tracking anything. I was just kind of going through the motions, watching some videos here, reading some articles there, practicing occasionally, but I had no system to measure my progress. No journal, no records, nothing. And because I couldn't see the improvements, I assumed there weren't any.
That's so relatable, Jack. I think almost every language learner has been there at some point. The invisible progress problem, when you're too close to your own learning to notice how far you've actually come.
Exactly. So what happened was I found an old notebook where I had written some journal entries in Spanish from month 1. And when I compared them to what I could write now, I was absolutely shocked. The difference was incredible. My vocabulary had expanded so much, my grammar structures were more complex, and my sentences flowed more naturally. I couldn't believe it.
Wow, that's such a powerful moment. Finding that notebook must have been like discovering buried treasure. All that invisible progress suddenly made visible.
It absolutely was. And that's when I really understood the concept of linguistic compound interest. Every single day that you practice, you're not just learning one new thing, you're building upon everything you've already learned. The knowledge compounds, it multiplies. It's not just addition, it's multiplication.
I love that distinction, Jack. So it's not just that you're adding one new vocabulary word to everything you know, it's that you're creating new connections between words, between grammar structures, between concepts. The whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts.
Precisely. And this is why I became so passionate about tracking, because once you understand compound interest, you realize that consistency is absolutely the key. You can't expect to see dramatic results after just 1 week or 1 month. You need to trust the process and keep investing every single day.
That's such an important mindset shift, Jack. And I think it's something that many learners struggle with. We live in an age of instant gratification where we expect everything to happen immediately. But language learning is the opposite of that. It's slow, it's gradual, and it's deeply rewarding if you can stick with it.
Guilty as charged, right, Anna? I mean, I remember wanting to be fluent after watching one season of a TV show in Spanish. I was like, how hard can it be? I've been watching this for 10 hours.
Oh my goodness, Jack. That's hilarious. And I think we've all been there at some point. We overestimate what we can accomplish in a day and underestimate what we can accomplish in a year.
Absolutely. So let me ask you, Anna, when did you first discover the power of compound interest in language learning?
Oh, that's a beautiful story, actually. It was when I was learning Japanese about 5 years ago. I had been studying seriously for about 8 months, and I was getting really discouraged. I could read basic sentences, but I couldn't understand anything when Japanese people spoke to me. It was so frustrating.
I can imagine how discouraging that must have been, Anna. Reading and listening are such different skills, aren't they?
They really are. And the thing is, I almost gave up. I was this close to just accepting that I would never be able to understand spoken Japanese. But then, something magical happened.
What was it? Tell me more.
Okay, so I went to Japan for a vacation, my first time visiting the country. And on the third day, I was in a small restaurant in Kyoto, and the owner started talking to me. And you know what? I understood her. Not everything, but I understood the main points of what she was saying. And she asked me a question, and I was actually able to respond.
That's amazing, Anna. What a breakthrough moment.
It was absolutely incredible. And here's what made it even more special. I realized that all those hours of listening practice had been working, even when I couldn't tell. My brain was absorbing the sounds, the rhythm, the intonation patterns. It was all compound interest, just like you're saying, Jack. The investment had been accumulating, and finally, I got to see the returns.
That's such a beautiful story, Anna. And it perfectly illustrates why we need to trust the process even when we can't see immediate results. Your brain was doing the work even when you felt like you weren't making progress.
Exactly. And this is why tracking is so important. Because on those days when you feel like you're not making progress, you can look back at your old work and see how far you've come. The notebook that you showed me earlier, that's exactly what it does. It makes the invisible visible.
I love that phrase, making the invisible visible. That's going to be our theme for today's episode. We want to help you create systems that reveal your progress, that show you just how much you're growing every single day.
Yes, and speaking of systems, let's talk about how to actually set up your tracking system. Because I know a lot of listeners might be thinking, okay, this sounds great, but how do I actually do this in practice?
Great point, Anna. Let's dive into that right now. So, Anna, when it comes to setting up a tracking system, where do you even begin? Because I know from personal experience that it can feel a bit overwhelming at first. There are so many things you could potentially track: vocabulary, grammar, pronunciation, listening skills, speaking fluency, the list goes on and on.
That's such a good question, Jack. And I think the key is to start simple. You don't need to track everything from day one. In fact, I would actually recommend against that because it becomes unsustainable. You'll get burned out trying to measure everything.
Right. So what would you suggest as a starting point?
I would suggest choosing just 2 or 3 things to track consistently. And these should be things that are meaningful to you and align with your current learning goals. For example, if you're focusing on building vocabulary, you might track how many new words you learn each week and how many you can actively use in conversation.
Okay, so specific, measurable metrics. I like that. What about for someone who's more focused on speaking? What should they track?
For speaking, I would recommend tracking the duration and quality of your speaking practice. So, how long did you speak in English today? And on a scale of 1 to 10, how comfortable did you feel? Those are simple but effective metrics. You could also record yourself speaking and compare recordings from different time periods.
Oh, I love the recording idea. That's such a powerful way to hear your own progress. I do that with my Spanish practice, and it's incredible to hear how much my pronunciation and fluency have improved over time.
Yes. And the beautiful thing about recordings is that they're objective. You can't lie to yourself when you hear the difference between your old recording and your new one. It's undeniable evidence of your progress.
Exactly. So let's talk about specific tools and methods. What are some practical ways that learners can track their progress?
Okay, so there's several approaches, and I think different people will resonate with different methods. First, there's the classic pen and paper approach. You can keep a language journal where you write down new vocabulary, grammar patterns, and reflections on your learning. Some people find that writing by hand helps them remember better anyway.
I completely agree about the writing by hand thing. There's something about the physical act of writing that engages your brain differently than typing. I keep a small notebook in my pocket for new vocabulary, and it's become one of my most treasured possessions.
Oh, Jack, that's so cute. I love that image of you with your little vocabulary notebook. I do something similar, actually. I have a notes app on my phone where I keep lists of new phrases and expressions. It's organized by topic, so when I want to talk about travel, I can easily find all the relevant vocabulary I've collected.
So you prefer digital for organization, but physical for the pocket notebook. That's a nice hybrid approach. What about more specific tracking tools?
Well, there are also apps designed specifically for tracking language learning. For example, some people use habit trackers to make sure they're practicing every day. Others use spreadsheet formulas to calculate their linguistic compound interest, how many hours they've invested, how many words they've learned, things like that.
That sounds like a fun project for anyone who's into data and numbers. You could create a whole dashboard with graphs and everything.
Right? And for those who are more creative, there's always the option of creating visual representations of progress. Some learners make videos documenting their journey. Others create playlists of songs they've learned to sing in English. Some even draw progress maps on posters.
Those are all such creative approaches, Anna. I think the most important thing is to find a method that resonates with you personally, something that you'll actually enjoy maintaining.
Exactly. Because if tracking feels like a chore, you won't do it consistently. It needs to be something that adds value to your learning experience, not something that drains your energy. What approach works best for you, Jack?
For me, it's a combination of things. I keep a daily practice log where I record what I did that day, reading, listening, speaking, vocabulary study, whatever. And then I have a weekly review where I look at my week as a whole and reflect on what went well and what I could improve.
I love that structure. Daily logging plus weekly review. It gives you both the granular view and the big picture view. Do you ever do monthly reviews as well?
Yes, monthly reviews are actually my favorite because I can really see the trends over time. Sometimes I'll look back at a month and realize, oh, I was really focused on listening practice that month. Or, wow, I had a week where I barely practiced at all. The monthly view helps me understand patterns in my learning behavior.
That's really insightful, Jack. Understanding your patterns is so valuable because it helps you anticipate challenges and plan accordingly. If you know that you tend to struggle with consistency during busy periods, you can prepare strategies in advance.
Right, and that's exactly what we want to help our listeners do today. But Anna, before we move on to the next topic, I want to ask you this. What are some common mistakes that learners make when trying to set up a tracking system?
Oh, that's such an important question. The first mistake is trying to track too much. When you try to measure everything, you become overwhelmed and eventually stop tracking altogether. Start with just a few key metrics and expand later when the habit is established.
That makes total sense. What else?
Another mistake is being too rigid or perfectionist about it. If you miss a day of tracking, you shouldn't beat yourself up or feel like the whole system has failed. The goal is progress, not perfection. A missed day here and there is completely normal and okay.
I love that reminder, and I think it ties into the broader principle of self-compassion in language learning. We need to be patient and kind to ourselves throughout this journey.
Absolutely. And speaking of the journey, let's talk about something that I think is equally important as tracking, building consistent habits. Because what good is a tracking system if you're not actually practicing consistently?
Great transition, Anna. Let's dive right into that right now. So, Anna, let's talk about the real secret to success in language learning. And I think we both know what it is. It's not about having the perfect study plan or the most expensive course. It's about showing up every single day, even when you don't feel like it.
Yes, exactly. Consistency is absolutely the key, Jack. I know we've mentioned it a few times already, but it's worth repeating because it's so fundamental. The most successful language learners are not necessarily the most talented or the ones with the best resources. They're the ones who just keep going, day after day, week after week, month after month.
And this is where a lot of people struggle, isn't it? Life gets in the way, work becomes busy, you travel, you get sick. Suddenly, 3 weeks have passed and you haven't practiced at all, and then you feel guilty, and the guilt makes you want to avoid it even more.
Ugh, the guilt cycle. I know it so well, and I'm sure many of our listeners do too. You miss a few days, and then you feel so bad about yourself that you just stop entirely. It's like the all or nothing mentality that ends up costing you months or even years of progress.
Guilty as charged on that one, Anna. I've definitely been there. I remember one period in my Spanish learning when I had a really busy month at work. I didn't practice for about 3 weeks, and when I finally had time again, I felt so guilty that I avoided Spanish entirely for another month. It was such a waste.
But Jack, that's such a common experience. And I think the important thing to remember is that taking breaks is not inherently bad. Life happens, and sometimes we need to focus our energy on other things. The key is how we come back from those breaks.
So, what do you suggest? How can learners build habits that are resilient enough to withstand life's inevitable disruptions?
I think the first thing is to start smaller than you think. When most people decide to start a language learning habit, they go all in. I'm going to study for 2 hours every single day. And that enthusiasm lasts for about a week before it burns out. A much better approach is to start with just 5 or 10 minutes a day.
Really? Just 5 minutes? That seems almost too small to make a difference.
I know it sounds counterintuitive, Jack, but it actually works. The goal is to build the habit first. Once the habit is established, you can gradually increase the time, but you need to start with something so small that it's almost impossible to fail.
Okay, I'm listening. Tell me more about this approach.
Well, the science behind this is that our brains are wired to resist big changes. When we try to make dramatic changes to our routine, we trigger our brain's resistance system and we end up rebelling against ourselves. But when we make tiny changes, our brain doesn't see them as threatening and we can slip them into our existing routine much more easily.
That's really interesting, Anna. So instead of thinking, I need to become fluent, you think, I just need to open my vocabulary app and learn one word. And once you've started, you'll often find that you do more than the minimum.
Exactly. The secret is to remove the friction. Make it as easy as possible to start. And then, once you've started, momentum often takes over. You know that feeling when you tell yourself you'll just do 5 minutes of exercise, but then you end up doing 30? Same principle applies here.
I love that analogy. Now, what about people who really struggle with motivation? How can they stay consistent when they're just not feeling it?
That's such a great question, Jack. For those learners, I would suggest finding ways to make the habit enjoyable or meaningful. For example, if you love watching movies, make your English practice about watching English movies with subtitles. If you love cooking, find recipes in English and cook dishes from English-speaking countries. If you love music, learn the lyrics to your favorite songs.
So it's about aligning the practice with your existing interests and passions, rather than forcing yourself to do something that feels like a chore.
Precisely. And I think this is where a lot of traditional language learning methods fail. They make the process feel like work when it should feel like play. When you're genuinely enjoying what you're doing, consistency becomes much easier because you're not fighting against resistance.
Curious, what about accountability? Do you think that helps with consistency?
Absolutely. Accountability can be a powerful tool. There are a few ways to create it. First, you can tell your friends and family about your language learning goals. When others know what you're working on, you feel more pressure to follow through. Second, you can find an accountability partner, someone else who is also learning a language or is interested in your progress.
Oh, I love the accountability partner idea. It's like having a workout buddy for your brain. Do you have any experience with that, Anna?
I do, actually. When I was learning Japanese, I found a language exchange partner online. We would meet once a week via video call, and we would spend half the time speaking Japanese and half speaking English. Having that weekly appointment really kept me on track because I knew I would have to report on my progress.
That's brilliant, and the mutual benefit of helping each other learn feels more like a collaboration than a chore.
Exactly. It's a win-win situation. You're helping someone while also helping yourself. And there's something really special about having someone to share the journey with. Language learning can feel lonely sometimes, especially if you're the only person you know who's interested in it.
That's so true, Anna. And speaking of sharing the journey, let's talk about something that I think is crucial for long-term consistency: celebrating small wins. Why do you think that's important?
Oh my goodness, Jack, this is so important. I cannot stress it enough. Our brains are wired to respond to positive reinforcement, and when we celebrate our achievements, even the tiny ones, we release dopamine, which makes us feel good. And when we feel good, we want to continue doing the thing that made us feel good.
So celebrating small wins creates a positive feedback loop.
Exactly. It's like training a dog with treats. Every time your dog does something good, you give it a treat, and it learns to repeat the behavior. Our brains work in a similar way. When we celebrate our progress, we're essentially training our brain to associate language learning with positive feelings.
I love that analogy, treating yourself like a good dog. What are some ways that listeners can celebrate their small wins?
Oh, there are so many possibilities. You could treat yourself to your favorite coffee when you complete a week of practice. You could buy yourself a small gift when you reach a vocabulary milestone. You could take a fun screenshot or selfie to commemorate an achievement. Or you could simply give yourself permission to feel proud.
I love that last one, permission to feel proud. I think a lot of us forget to acknowledge our accomplishments because we feel like they're not big enough or significant enough. But every step forward is worth celebrating.
Absolutely. And Jack, this ties perfectly into our next topic, which is staying motivated through plateaus, because plateaus are one of the biggest motivation killers for language learners.
Right. Let's dive into that because I know this is something that many of our listeners struggle with. So, Anna, let's talk about one of the most frustrating experiences for any language learner: the plateau. You know, that period when you've been making great progress and then suddenly, nothing. You're not getting worse, but you're not getting better either. It feels like you're stuck in mud.
Oh, the dreaded plateau. I know it so well, and I'm sure everyone listening does too. It's one of the most demotivating experiences in language learning. You put in all this effort, you're doing everything right, and yet no visible improvement. It's enough to make anyone want to quit.
I've been there more times than I can count, Anna. Honestly, plateaus are probably the #1 reason I've considered giving up over the years. It just feels so discouraging to put in work and not see any results.
But Jack, here's the thing that I want our listeners to understand. Plateaus are not a sign that you're failing. They're actually a completely normal and even necessary part of the learning process. Think about it like this. When you're building muscle at the gym, you don't just get stronger every single day. Your body needs time to rest and recover. And during that time, the muscle is actually rebuilding itself to become stronger.
So you think plateaus might be similar? Like maybe the brain is consolidating all the information you've learned and creating new neural pathways?
That's exactly what I believe is happening, Jack. When you're in a plateau, you're not actually stuck, you're actually processing. Your brain is taking everything you've learned and integrating it, making it deeper, more automatic, more intuitive. It's like the difference between knowing how to drive and being a natural at it.
What a beautiful way to reframe plateaus, Anna. So instead of seeing them as obstacles, we should see them as opportunities for our brains to do the important background work.
Precisely. And this is where tracking becomes so incredibly valuable. Because when you're tracking your progress properly, you can often see that you're still making progress even when you don't feel like you are. Maybe your listening comprehension is improving, or your vocabulary is expanding, or your pronunciation is getting more natural. All of these things might not be obvious day to day, but they add up over time.
So the tracking system we talked about earlier helps us see past the plateau and recognize the hidden progress.
Exactly. And another important thing to remember about plateaus is that they often happen right before a breakthrough. It's like the universe is testing your commitment before rewarding you. So if you can push through the plateau, you're often rewarded with a sudden leap in ability.
Oh, I love that perspective, Anna. It gives meaning to the struggle. What are some specific strategies for getting through a plateau?
Well, the first strategy is to change something up. If you've been doing the same types of activities, try something new. If you've been reading, try listening. If you've been studying alone, try speaking with someone. New stimuli can help break you out of the plateau by engaging different parts of your brain.
What about setting new goals? Do you think that helps?
Absolutely. Goals are like fuel for motivation, and when you hit a plateau, your old goals might feel stale or irrelevant. Setting new, exciting goals can reignite your enthusiasm and give you something concrete to work toward. For example, instead of, I want to become fluent, you might set a goal like, I want to be able to watch a movie in English without subtitles by the end of this month.
That's a much more tangible goal. And speaking of movies, I remember a time when I hit a plateau with my Spanish listening skills. I could understand most things when people spoke slowly and clearly, but real conversations were still a struggle. Do you know what helped me break through?
What was it, Jack? Tell me.
It was actually podcasts. I started listening to Spanish podcasts in the background while I was doing other things, cooking, cleaning, exercising, and at first I couldn't understand much at all, but I just kept listening, and slowly the sounds started making sense. Within a few months, I could understand podcasts meant for native speakers, and my overall listening comprehension had improved dramatically.
That's amazing, Jack. And I think that story illustrates an important point. Sometimes the breakthrough comes from persistence rather than from trying harder. You didn't force yourself to understand, you just kept exposing yourself to the language, and eventually your brain figured it out.
Right. It's like the concept of linguistic compound interest again. Every hour of listening was adding to the total, even when I couldn't see the results immediately.
So let me ask you this, Jack. How do you deal with the emotional side of plateaus? Because I think a lot of learners underestimate how discouraging they can be psychologically.
That's such a good point, Anna. The emotional toll of plateaus is real, and we shouldn't dismiss it. What I try to do is acknowledge the frustration without letting it control my behavior. So I might say to myself, I feel frustrated, and that's okay. This is a normal part of the process. But then I also remind myself of all the progress I've made so far.
I love that approach, Jack. Self-compassion is so important during difficult times. And I think it helps to remember that every language learner, no matter how skilled, goes through plateaus. Even native speakers have periods when they feel like their language abilities aren't growing.
Really? Native speakers have plateaus too? That somehow makes me feel better about my own struggles.
Absolutely. Think about it. Native speakers also have periods when they feel stuck. Maybe they stop learning new vocabulary or their writing skills plateau. The difference is that they've already built up a foundation, so the plateau doesn't feel as dramatic, but it happens.
That's such a comforting thought, Anna. So here's my takeaway from this conversation about plateaus. First, they're normal and even necessary. Second, they're not as invisible as they seem if you're tracking properly. Third, they often precede breakthroughs. And fourth, the key is to persist, change things up, set new goals, and be kind to yourself.
Perfect summary, Jack. And I think we should emphasize that staying motivated through a plateau is really about mindset. It's about trusting the process, believing in your ability to improve, and knowing that the work you're doing today is building toward future success.
Yes, which leads us perfectly to our next topic, the power of small daily wins, because I think a lot of learners underestimate how much impact the tiny, seemingly insignificant actions can have over time.
Absolutely, Jack. Let's dive into that right now.
So, Anna, I want to start by asking you a question. Can you think of a time when a really small action led to unexpectedly big results in your language learning?
Oh, that's a great question, Jack. Let me think for a moment. Okay, I have one. When I was learning French, I used to listen to one French song every single morning while I was getting ready for work. That's it, just one song, maybe 3 or 4 minutes long. I didn't even consider it proper study time. It was just part of my morning routine.
Just 3 or 4 minutes a day? That really doesn't sound like much.
I know, right? It sounds almost ridiculous when I say it out loud, but here's the thing. Because I listened to the same song every morning for a week before moving on to the next one, I eventually memorized all the lyrics. And memorizing song lyrics is one of the best ways to learn natural expressions, pronunciation patterns, and cultural references.
So just a few minutes a day over the course of months resulted in you knowing dozens of songs and all the vocabulary and expressions that came with them?
Exactly. And that routine also trained my ear to French sounds. I started recognizing words and patterns much faster because I'd been unconsciously absorbing the rhythm and melody of the language every single morning.
That's incredible, Anna, and it really illustrates the power of small, consistent actions. What would you say to someone who thinks that a few minutes a day isn't enough to make a difference?
I would say that every expert was once a beginner and every fluent speaker was once someone who knew nothing. You have to start somewhere, and starting small is absolutely the right approach. 5 minutes today is infinitely better than 0 minutes today. And tomorrow you can do 5 minutes again, and the day after that. And eventually, those 5 minutes add up to hours, and those hours add up to real fluency.
I love that, Anna, and it reminds me of something I've heard about financial investments. The best time to start investing was 10 years ago, but the second best time is now. I think the same applies to language learning. The best time to start was when you first decided you wanted to learn English, but the second best time is right now, today.
That's such a powerful reminder, Jack. And I think it also helps to think about language learning as a marathon rather than a sprint. If you're running a marathon and you try to sprint the whole way, you'll exhaust yourself before you reach the finish line. But if you pace yourself and just keep putting one foot in front of the other, you'll eventually get there.
So, what are some examples of small daily wins that listeners could incorporate into their routines?
Oh, there are so many possibilities. Here are some of my favorites. First, learn one new vocabulary word every day. Just one. Write it down, say it out loud, and try to use it in a sentence before the day is over. It takes about 30 seconds, but over a year, that's 365 new words in your vocabulary.
That's actually a lot of vocabulary. What else?
Second, listen to 1 minute of English audio every day. It could be a podcast snippet, a news segment, or even just a YouTube video. 1 minute is nothing, but if you do it every day, your listening comprehension will improve dramatically over time.
What about speaking? A lot of learners struggle to find opportunities to practice speaking.
Great point, Jack. For speaking, you could practice saying one sentence out loud every day. Just one sentence. You could describe your morning routine, talk about what you had for breakfast, or narrate what you're doing as you're doing it. The key is to get your mouth used to forming English sounds.
I love that idea, and I think it's especially helpful for people who are too shy or nervous to have full conversations yet. Starting with just one sentence removes a lot of the psychological barriers.
Exactly. And another small win could be reading one paragraph of an English article every day. It could be a news article, a blog post, or even just a social media post. Again, it's just a few minutes, but over time, you'll become much more comfortable reading in English.
Anna, I'm curious. Have you ever tracked your small wins over a long period of time? Like, did you ever calculate the total impact of all those tiny actions?
I did once, actually. When I finished my first year of learning Japanese, I sat down and counted everything. How many vocabulary words had I learned? How many hours had I listened? How many pages had I read? How many conversations had I had? And the total was absolutely staggering. I had done so much more than I ever felt like I was doing on a day-to-day basis.
That's amazing, Anna. What was the most surprising thing you discovered?
I think the most surprising thing was how much listening time had accumulated. On any given day, I never felt like I was listening that much, maybe 20 or 30 minutes here and there. But when I added it all up for the year, I had listened to over 200 hours of Japanese audio. 200 hours! That's like watching 100 movies or listening to dozens of albums. I had completely underestimated the power of those small daily sessions.
And I bet that's exactly the experience of our listeners, too. They're probably thinking, I'm only doing a little bit every day. It can't be making a difference. But the numbers don't lie. Those small daily wins add up to something truly remarkable.
Absolutely, Jack. And I want to add one more thing about the psychological benefits of small wins. Every time you complete a small action, you get a tiny hit of dopamine, which makes you feel good. And that positive feeling encourages you to do the same thing again tomorrow. It's a virtuous cycle.
So the small wins create momentum, and momentum creates bigger wins. What a beautiful system.
It really is. And Jack, this is the perfect segue into our final subtopic, creating your personal fluency roadmap. Because once you understand the power of small daily wins, you can start designing a plan that incorporates them in a way that works for your unique life and goals.
I love it, Anna. Let's wrap up with that, and then we'll do our vocabulary breakdown and reflection questions. So, Anna, let's talk about something that I think is the culmination of everything we've discussed today, creating a personal fluency roadmap. What exactly does that mean, and why is it important?
Great question, Jack. A fluency roadmap is essentially a personalized plan that outlines your language learning goals, strategies, and milestones. It's like a GPS for your fluency journey. Instead of just wandering aimlessly and hoping you end up somewhere good, you have a clear destination and a path to get there.
I love that GPS analogy. So how do you actually create one of these roadmaps?
And the first step is to define your destination. Where do you want to be in terms of English fluency? Do you want to be able to have casual conversations? Do you need to give professional presentations? Do you want to read academic papers? Do you want to understand movies without subtitles? Be as specific as possible.
Specific goals are so important. I've made the mistake of setting vague goals like become fluent in the past, and it never worked because I didn't know when I had achieved it. But when I set specific goals like be able to discuss my work projects in English, I had a clear target to aim for.
Exactly, and that's the key. The more specific your goal, the easier it is to create a plan to achieve it. Now, the second step is to assess your current location. Where are you right now in terms of your English skills? What are your strengths and weaknesses?
How would someone assess their current level? Do they need to take a formal test?
Not necessarily, Jack. While formal tests can be helpful, you can also assess yourself informally. Think about the types of English interactions you currently have. Can you watch TV shows? Can you write emails? Can you hold a conversation about familiar topics? Can you discuss abstract ideas? These questions can help you identify where you are on the fluency spectrum.
So it's about honest self-assessment, and I think that's something a lot of learners struggle with. Some people overestimate their abilities and set unrealistic goals, while others underestimate themselves and sell themselves short.
You're absolutely right, Jack. Both directions are problematic. That's why I often recommend that learners get feedback from others, a teacher, a tutor, a language exchange partner, or even just a friend who's good at English. Outside perspectives can help balance out our internal biases.
Good point. Now, what comes after assessing your current level?
The third step is to identify your route. What strategies and resources will you use to get from where you are to where you want to be? Based on everything we've discussed today, this should include regular practice sessions, a tracking system, small daily wins, and strategies for dealing with plateaus.
How detailed should this route be?
I would suggest a balance between structure and flexibility. You want enough structure to keep you on track, but not so much that it's rigid and unsustainable. For example, you might commit to practicing English for at least 10 minutes every day, but you leave it open as to what type of practice you do. Some days you might read, other days you might listen, and other days you might speak.
I love that approach, Anna. It gives you direction without making you feel trapped. What about milestones? Are those important?
Absolutely. Milestones are like waypoints along your journey. They give you something to celebrate and help you see that you're making progress. These could be things like complete my first English conversation with a native speaker, watch an entire movie without subtitles, or write a 500-word essay in English.
And these milestones should be challenging but achievable. Too easy and they don't feel rewarding, too hard and they become discouraging.
Exactly. Now, the final step is to review and adjust. Your roadmap shouldn't be set in stone. Life changes, goals evolve, and what worked for you last month might not work for you this month. Schedule regular check-ins, maybe monthly or quarterly, to review your progress and make any necessary adjustments.
So it's an iterative process. You create the roadmap, follow it for a while, assess how it's going, and then refine it based on what you've learned.
Precisely. And I think that's one of the most important lessons from today's episode. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to language learning. What works for someone else might not work for you, and vice versa. The key is to experiment, track your results, and keep refining your approach until you find what works best for you.
I love that, Anna, and I think it perfectly ties together everything we've discussed today. Tracking, consistency, compound interest, small wins, plateaus, and personal roadmaps. They're all pieces of the same puzzle.
They really are. And Jack, I want to thank you for this amazing conversation. I feel like we've covered so much ground today, and I hope our listeners have learned as much as I have.
It was my pleasure, Anna. I always love diving deep into these topics with you. And now, shall we move on to our vocabulary breakdown?
Let's do it.
All right, English learners, it's time for our vocabulary breakdown. Today we're going to go over some really useful phrases related to tracking your progress and staying motivated. These are expressions that you'll hear and use all the time in English, so pay close attention.
That's right, Jack, and I'll be going through each phrase with you. Let's start with the first one.
The first phrase is track your progress. This means to monitor and record how you're doing over time. For example, I've been tracking my progress with a language journal, and I can see how much I've improved.
Great example, Jack. Another way to say this is monitor your development or measure your growth. So you might hear someone say, I monitor my development by recording myself speaking every week.
Next up is compound interest. This is a financial term, but we use it metaphorically in language learning. It means that small, consistent efforts accumulate over time, just like money earns interest in a bank. For instance, learning 5 new words every day might seem small, but the compound interest of that knowledge over a year is enormous.
I love that metaphor, Jack. It's such a powerful way to understand language learning. Next phrase, build consistent habits. This means to create routines that you do regularly. For example, to build consistent habits, I practice English for just 10 minutes every morning.
Speaking of 10 minutes, let's talk about small daily wins. This phrase refers to the tiny accomplishments you achieve every day, like completing one vocabulary exercise was a small daily win, but it added to my motivation.
Exactly. Now, what about hit a plateau? This is when you stop making progress for a while. You could say, I was improving quickly, but then I hit a plateau and felt stuck for weeks.
Plateaus can be so frustrating, but remember, they're normal. Next phrase, breakthrough. This means to overcome an obstacle and make significant progress. For example, after months of practice, I finally broke through and could understand native speakers.
That's such a satisfying moment when it happens. Now, what about set goals? This is obviously very important. For instance, I set goals to learn 50 new words every month.
And what do you say when you're working toward those goals? You make progress, right?
Yes, make progress is used all the time. I'm making progress with my English, but I still have a long way to go. Or you could say achieve milestones, which are specific achievements along the way.
Milestones are so important for staying motivated. Now, what about stay motivated? This is crucial for long-term success. For example, to stay motivated, I celebrate every small achievement.
I love celebrating achievements. Now, what about consistency is key? This is one of my favorite phrases. It means that doing something regularly is the most important factor for success. Consistency is key when learning a language.
Absolutely. And speaking of consistency, what about show up every day? This is a phrase that means to be present and make an effort consistently. For instance, you don't have to be perfect, you just have to show up every day and do your best.
That's such an encouraging phrase. Now, what about trust the process? This means to believe in the system or approach you're using even when you don't see immediate results. For example, I couldn't see my progress, but I trusted the process and kept practicing.
Trust is so important in language learning. Now, let's talk about accumulate knowledge. This means to gather information gradually over time. For instance, every lesson helps me accumulate knowledge and become a better English speaker.
Knowledge does accumulate, doesn't it? Now, what about invest time and effort? This is when you put resources into something expecting future benefits. I invest time in English every day because I know it will pay off in the future.
And when it pays off, you get returns on your investment. For example, all those hours of practice are finally giving me returns. I can understand movies now.
That's the best feeling. Now, what about push through? This means to continue despite difficulty. When I hit a plateau, I had to push through and keep practicing.
And to push through, you need resilience, which is the ability to recover from setbacks. For example, building resilience is essential for language learners.
What about personal roadmap? This is a customized plan for achieving your goals. For instance, I created a personal roadmap that outlines my path to fluency.
And finally, review and adjust. This means to look at what you've done and make changes as needed. Every month I review my progress and adjust my study plan.
These are all such valuable phrases, Jack. I hope our listeners will start using them in their daily English practice.
Me too, Anna. Now, shall we move on to our reflection questions?
Let's do it.
Okay, English learners, it's time for some reflection questions. These are questions I want you to think about and maybe even write down your answers in a journal. Grab a pen and paper and let's get started.
First question. What is your current English level and what are your specific goals? Think about why you started learning English and what you want to be able to do with it.
Second question. How have you been tracking your progress so far? Have you been keeping a journal, using an app, or just going by how you feel? What has worked well and what hasn't?
Third question. Think about the concept of linguistic compound interest. What small daily actions could you commit to starting today? Even if it's just 5 minutes, what could you do consistently?
Fourth question. Have you ever experienced a plateau in your language learning? How did it make you feel, and what did you do to get through it? What strategies could you use in the future?
Fifth question. What is one small win you could celebrate this week? It could be learning 5 new words, understanding a song lyric, or having a conversation. What achievement deserves recognition?
Sixth question. Who could be your accountability partner? Is there someone who could help keep you on track? A friend, a teacher, a language exchange partner? How could you set up a system of mutual accountability?
Seventh question. How do you plan to handle future plateaus or periods of low motivation? What strategies from today's episode will you use to push through?
Eighth question. Create a simple fluency roadmap for yourself. Where are you now? Where do you want to be in 1 year? What steps will you take to get there?
Ninth question. What is one new tracking method you want to try? It could be a journal, an app, recordings, or something creative. How will you implement it starting this week?
And finally, 10th question. Why is consistency important to you? What is your ultimate motivation for learning English? Write it down somewhere you'll see it every day as a reminder of why you started.
These are powerful questions, and I encourage you to take your time with them. Write down your answers, review them regularly, and watch how your understanding of your own learning journey deepens over time.
And remember, language learning is a marathon, not a sprint. Pace yourself, trust the process, and celebrate every small win along the way.
And that brings us to the end of today's episode. Wow, what a journey it's been. We covered so much ground today, from understanding linguistic compound interest to building consistent habits, staying motivated through plateaus, and creating your personal fluency roadmap.
I know, Anna. It feels like we've given our listeners a complete toolkit for their language learning journey. And the best part is that they can start implementing everything we talked about right away.
That's right. Whether you're just starting out or you've been learning for years, there's always something you can do to improve your tracking and motivation. The key is to be consistent, be patient, and trust that your small daily actions are adding up to something great.
Absolutely. And I want to thank you, Anna, for this amazing conversation. I always learn so much from our discussions, and I hope our listeners feel the same.
The pleasure is all mine, Jack. And I want to thank our listeners for joining us today. We really do appreciate you being here, and we hope you'll come back for our next episode.
Yes, please subscribe, share this episode with your friends, and leave us a review if you enjoyed it. Your feedback helps us create better content for you.
And remember, every expert was once a beginner. Keep going, keep learning, and keep believing in yourself. You've got this.
Until next time, English learners, keep up the fantastic work, and we'll see you soon.
Bye for now.
Bye!
Your learning journey doesn't stop here. Keep improving your English. Click the next video or explore more episodes we've picked just for you. See you in the next lesson.